Hi everyone, it's Dr. Michael Suzanne Parsons again, and this is video 2 that's kind of laying out your journey, or at least the start of your journey here at the Natural Path Health Center. So you've already met with me, you've had your brain map done, and hopefully we've either printed you a copy that you've picked up or we've emailed it to you. So the purpose of this video is to kind of give you an overview. I'm trying to take 24 years of experience and shortening it to user-friendly little bits and pieces to explain your map to you. But there's a lot of foundational information that would help you get more understanding of what's going on as far as your brain health in the world of brain waves. So that's the purpose of this video. So if you happen to have your map, go ahead and pull it out, and then when you and I meet, I'm going to go into a little bit deeper detail specifically about your map. But today I'm going to show you my own map. This is my most recent map that I have run, so you get to see the inside workings of Dr. P's brain. So on the first page, it's just a general explanation of what's happening with the map, but I'm going to translate that. So as far as brain maps are concerned, the whole study of brain waves really started back in the 60s, and we have a really good sense of what the brain may be producing in relation to how you think, you feel, and you behave. Because the brain is the GPS for the rest of the body. So when we're looking at brain waves, know that there's a big pool of research that explains if someone's making too much or too little of something, we can kind of predict how you may think, feel, or respond. Now, know that this doesn't tell me when the body may have gotten out of balance. It just tells me that when we mapped you, this is kind of what we're looking at. So when you turn to the second page, which is actually page 1 numbered at the bottom, you're going to see some speedometers at the top of the page. Now these speedometers, these gas gauges, we want that gas gauge dial, so to speak, the gauge part at 0. That's what we're shooting for. The higher the number, the more out of balance the brain is. Now if you notice, there's some columns. And with the columns, this first column, some of you may have done an online questionnaire, some of you may not have. But if you did have the online questionnaire done, you'll see multiple colors, green, orange, or red. If you didn't do the online questionnaire, this column will all be green. So the purpose of the online questionnaire, for those of you who did fill that out, is really to see, are you aware of the symptoms that you may be displaying versus what the map is showing us. So once again, some of you may have done that, you may not have. What we're really wanting to focus on in this instant is this second column. This is the column, the second column here, this is the column that's really talking about the specific brain map. So when you're looking at this map, I want to point out some of the things that people are like, what is that? I don't know what that is. So in the first column at the top, here, this column, what this is looking at is kind of some behavior things. And one of the things that pops up in a lot of people's maps, not in mine this time, but in many people that I review, is socially inappropriate. Now, just a rule of thumb, the more green we see on your map, the more imbalanced your brain is. Orange means your brain's out of balance, red means the pattern is fairly ingrained. So keep that in mind when you're looking at it. So if the button socially inappropriate is lit up, it means that there's some things that aren't working in balance in the brain. So socially inappropriate can mean a lot of different things, and there's no way that I can get into your world to say, aha, that's it. But I'm just going to share with you some examples that people have shared with me. One might be you see a group of friends, you haven't seen them in a long time, you're excited to see them, and you rush over to say hello. But your brain didn't clue in, wasn't aware that they were in this very deep, private, personal conversation. So those who are in that deep, personal, private conversation, when you joyously bound up to say hello, they're going to think, oh, how rude, she interrupted, or he, gee, that was so inappropriate. It could be the difference between a 2-year-old, they're so adorable and cute when they're learning how to walk, and maybe little boy junior drops his pants and pees on a tree. It's kind of appropriate behavior for a 2-year-old, but if I see a 16-year-old or a 34-year-old doing that outside my treatment window here, that's not so appropriate. I've got a 12-year-old who, when she is involved, she's full out, she's very involved in 4-H, she does Peach Blossom Festival, she'll talk your ear off. But if you're a waiter or a waitress and you ask her what she wants to order, she literally shuts down. She slumps back in her seat, she won't make eye contact, and she will not speak. Those are just some examples of what may or may not be appropriate. An opposite to one of the examples would be in a social setting, you don't feel comfortable, you don't want to talk, it's hard for people to engage you in conversation. That may be deemed as inappropriate. So those are just some ideas, and it's hard for me to pinpoint what that may look like, because our brain, as it grows and develops, starts to inhibit behavior. It's not appropriate for me to, I don't know, take my clothes off while I'm talking to a patient. Not appropriate. I have a good brain, so that's not going to happen. But we want to make sure that the brain puts the pause button or pushes the stop button on some of the thoughts and things and ideas that we have that may not be in our best interest. Now, other things that pop up are hyper-emotional. So you might be fine one minute, you watch a TV commercial, you're teary-eyed, or some people think you're overly sensitive, you're wearing your emotions on your sleeve. That might be some common characteristics. In the second column, victim mentality, this pops up fairly frequently, especially in people who have a background of maybe some emotional trauma. The self-talk is, this always happens to me, this always happened to me because of my parents. There's always blame, not to say that those things didn't happen and they weren't traumatic, but when the brain's out of balance, we get locked into that place. That is not a healthy place to be. So that may pop up on your map. Rumination is another one, and I've experienced this. This is where you get a thought, an idea, a belief, or even a song in your head and you can't get it out. You just wake up at times in the middle of the night singing the song you heard of earlier that day, or you just can't let go. I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. So those thoughts just keep rolling around and around and around, tying up a lot of brain energy that should be dispensed into other areas that are more productive and healthy for you. So agitation, irritability, passive-aggressive. With that, that's a very common thing, again. So for some people, you may feel those things, but you push the pause button. Your brain is still healthy enough to push the pause. Other people, if you're more out of balance, that might be the fist through the wall person, throwing things at someone you really do love, but you're just angry and you have all this energy that you need to get out. So it may be something you feel, it may be something that you actually act on. Once again, the pause button is all about the frontal lobes being able to calm down or push the limbic system back into a more controlled environment, so to speak. Now, in the third column, worry, in the top part, worry. That's another extremely common finding. So when I see someone with the worry pattern, what that means is your brain is turned into the worry channel. So your brain thinks you're wanting to constantly look for where's the problem, what needs to be fixed, what if, oh my gosh, I can't do this because, and we end up getting, over time, locked into this fear-based pattern where we're afraid to let our children sleep alone in their beds because you think they're going to stop breathing, even though they're old. You know, they're not in that very fragile first year of development. It could stop you from driving on the freeway. There's a lot of different scenarios around that. So that worry pattern has a lot of significance, and I'll explain why as we go along. Now on the second page, we have more of the speedometers, and this top corner one here, this executive processing, this really gives us clarity about what's happening with the frontal lobes. Now, as our brain develops, we start out as being infant, our brain is small, and our frontal lobes really grow, and it's the frontal lobes that allow us to have that higher level of thinking, what we call the executive processing. So for example, my cat, thank goodness, will never wake up and decide they want to rebuild a car engine. They don't have the DNA, they don't have the brain capacity to even want to do that. I could choose to learn how to do that. Side note, I won't, but I could if I needed to or had to. So the ability of the frontal lobes to put pause on that fight or flight, fear overreaction kind of thing, with the limbic system in particular, is really important for those frontal lobes to be able to tap those brakes and say, no, we're fine. We can drive just fine. I can merge onto traffic. I'm safe. I've never had an accident. I'm fine. So it's seeing kind of like what's going on with the frontal lobes in the ability of you to make decisions. So some of you may find on your map decision making, filtering difficulties, problems with problem solving. Now, everyone makes decisions and problem solves every day. You decided to get up and put clothes on. You may have driven to the store today. You chose what streets to go on. You decided when to change lanes. You chose to stop at the red light, which is a good decision. So that's kind of our automatic pilot. You don't have to relearn how to drive your car every time you get in it. But when there's something new that comes up, are you going to enroll your child in a private school? Are you going to sell your home? Are you going to buy a restaurant? Whatever those bigger decisions are, for you to make that decision, you have to tap into your memory centers. You're going to ask your memory, what do I know about this? Do I need to learn something about this? Do I need to talk to someone to get more information? And we should be able to do that quick decision making in nanoseconds. But as our brain gets out of balance, you may start to say, especially in bigger, newer types of decision making, I don't know. Don't ask me, quit asking me, stop, I need to think, I'll let you know in 2 or 3 days. Those kinds of things are like defensive, deflective moves because you're not able to pull up the information that you need quickly to make a fast decision. That speed of decision making is a very good indicator about the health of the brain. How quickly can you tap into the knowledge that you have and then come up with an answer? And by the way, not making a decision is making a decision. It's not a yes or a no, as I'm choosing not to decide. That's still a decision. So when it comes to your care, if you have that pattern on your map, your first intuition, because of how your brain is to say no. I can't do that. I can't move forward. I'm not able to do this, whatever that may be. But know that that's just a pattern in your brain. And as you get back into balance, the first thing that comes up won't be a no. You'll be able to actually make a decision based on the information you have and what's in your best interest. Now, this second category here, this is about memory. If you were going to be a psychiatrist or psychologist, you would have learned what each of these pieces of the memory mean. And we want all of these pieces to be working and in balance. So, for example, if you notice on my map, red is popped up for short-term memory. And that didn't surprise me because what I started to notice is I would forget things. If I did something or I had a thought and I wanted to remember it, I may not have. So short-term memory issues are very common, especially in our older population. And anything with memory in general, we really want to make sure the brain's working at amazing capacity, because the sign of irrevocable quality of life changes is when we develop Alzheimer's or dementia, which this map is not intended to diagnose any of those things. But for those of you who have that in your family history, make sure you tell me if you haven't already. And we want to really make sure the memory centers are working optimally, because we want to get off of that road. That's not a fun road to be down, and I don't want anyone to have to go through that. So if we see a lot of orange or red in this second category, then I automatically look down to the two below. Verbal processing. When we hear something, there's a lot of things that happen in the brain. So there's a difference between reading the words on the page and reading the words and understanding what each word means, and reading and understanding what each word means in context of the sentence, and then in context of the topic of discussion, the chapter, the paragraph. So we have a part of our brain that depicts what is the literal meaning of each word and what does it mean globally, reading comprehension. There's the other part of the temporal lobe that applies the emotional context to those words. So for example, you may call your best friend and say, hey, how was your day? And they say the words, it was fine, it was fine. But the emotion could be, it was fine, or it could be, it was fine. Two totally different emotions, but the words were the same. So our brain figures out what the global meaning means. And part of that is through our hearing. We hear the emotions. That's why we get swept up in music with a movie. It builds suspense, it builds romance. We feel things because of the implication and the interpretation that our brain gives it. So if that's out of balance, especially if it's really out of balance, you may be in conversation with someone, and it may be someone that you don't know well, but you might miss the subtle changes, the tonal changes in their voice that would give you a heads up of, uh-oh, they're getting mad, or uh-oh, there's something wrong. We tend to clue in more to people that we know and love. But once again, if the brain isn't interpreting and connecting the sensory part of the integration to the literal meaning of the words, then things are going to start to get mismatched. And then we're going to store that information potentially incorrectly. So when we have to pull it out, we might miss some things. Now, in the visual processing, as soon as we open up our eyes, whoa, the brain has to do so much more work. So with eyes closed, less activity in the brain. Brain's still working, it still has a lot to do, but as soon as we open up our eyes, we're looking at color and shapes, movement, speed, where you are in relation to objects that you have to walk around, like the coffee table that some of you might be running into. So that's all a huge part of what happens as soon as we open up our eyes. Now, even with our eyes open, the brain should still be working in balance. And for some of you, this visual processing is going to be orange or red. Now, a very common component that's out of balance on this one is event sequencing. So what that may look like in your life would be, let's say you're at Thanksgiving, and you're with the same group of family and friends that you've been with for 20 years. And Susie says, hey, remember 10 years ago when this happened, and then you wore that, and I said this, and you're like, was I there? I don't remember that. Or I remember this part, but I don't remember that part. So how your brain is recording that information and storing it, it's all in your brain, but it's not stored in a way that you could easily retrieve it. So that's the difference between people who have that amazing, sometimes annoying, crystal clear memory of everything, and your memory is kind of spotty. So that's often because of how your brain is storing that information. So when it comes to our memory centers, when the brain is out of balance in those centers, what happens is every memory of everything that's ever happened to you is stored in the brain. Now, we can't always retrieve it, and sometimes with hypnosis that can happen, but everything is still stored in there. But when the memory centers get out of balance, it would be something similar to you decide for this next tax season, you're going to save every receipt of everything you purchase. And your storage system is going to be taking that receipt and throwing it in the bathtub. Every receipt for a year goes in the bathtub. Now it's tax time, your tax man says, hey, I need the information, and you're like, no problem. He said, I need the receipt from Lowe's on March 24th. And you're like, no problem, I know exactly where it is, it's in the bathtub. You'll find it, but the time that it's going to take you to find that is not nearly as efficient as if it were stored in a more user-friendly way. So when it comes to your memory, this is something that's really, really important, and especially for kids, if we're reviewing a child's map, this is critical, because if they're having problems with auditory learning or visual learning or both, which is very common in ADD and ADHD, then they're going to struggle in school. It's going to be frustrating for them. They're not going to like it. It's not going to be easy, which means it's not going to be easy for you or your family, as a side note. If you see down here, there could be processing speed that's slower. Once again, it's like you open up too many windows on your computer and you see the little wheels spinning while you're waiting for the next thing to pop up. That's kind of how your brain is working. Now, years ago, I was talking with a patient, and I kind of jokingly said, you know, your brain's a pig. It needs a lot of energy. And we had a good laugh, but I really thought about it. It's true. The majority of your energy is needed to fire up and fuel your brain. So if your brain is out of balance, it's consuming more energy because it's not working efficiently the way it was designed to. Now, as you turn the page, this next part, see the bar graphs? There is a color code at the top. You'll be able to kind of look at this to determine what's going on with your brain. but white, the white bar is where that particular item should be. Delta, in my case, is higher than my white bar, which means I'm making too much delta. That's not necessarily a good thing. So that's how you kind of interpret this. You look at the color coding, and white is where you want to be. You don't want to be above, you don't want to be below, you want to kind of be right in the zone. So that's something that you can look at on your own. This section down here, though, this is where I actually get metabolic information. So when I'm looking down here, each of these circles represents one of the brain waves that we all are supposed to make. We make all of these all of the time. We're supposed to. But they're supposed to be in a certain balance. So for example, if my brain were perfect, which I haven't seen a perfect brain yet, but we have some that are more in balance than others, these will be all green. Doesn't mean things are running efficiently, but we want to see a lot of green. Remember, green is good. If we see blue, what that means is you're not making enough of that particular brainwave. So for example, I'm not making enough low alpha. So I'm not making enough low alpha, which is 8 to 10 hertz. When we're not making enough alpha, that puts us in what I call an adrenal fatigue pattern. With adrenal fatigue, there's two different drivers of that. One is brain-based. That's the one that I have currently that I'm getting treated for. Or there's the, we need to change the lifestyle, put you on some supplements, eat better to fix it. Two separate things. If you happen to have any of the alphas being too low, that's a big flag, because the only way that I have successfully been able to help that is by doing the brain retraining, just to let you know. There will be supplements involved as well, but we've got to get to the source, which is the brain that's running on fumes. That means your brain is pooped. It's exhausted. So each of these circles are going to have a different meaning. For some of you, I might share with you that I see some signs of brain inflammation. There could be signs that maybe your thyroid's off. If you have a lot of red in this delta area here, that could indicate that gluten is causing inflammation and driving those delta waves elevated. So you'll want to pay particular attention to this, because this is going to be something that I specifically interpret for you, which may then open up the door that there's some nutritional things that we may need to do. Okay? On the next page, I know it goes on and on, right? This is specifically what your brain is looking like with your eyes closed. We're going to focus mainly in this row here. So with your eyes closed, each of these individual circles, these are the specific sites that we were mapping. And if you notice in my map, I'm hoping that you're able to see those colors, there's some green, but there's some blue. I've got a lot of blue because my brain was running tired because of the adrenals, and then a little bit of red. So this has significance as to whether we need to get your brain in balance with your eyes closed. Now for some of you, if you're having insomnia or nightmares, sometimes this will be red, crazy red. And oftentimes what's happening is the brain is not sleeping, it doesn't want to sleep, it's keeping you awake. And in that quasi-sleep-wake state, you could have some very vivid, sometimes scary dreams. In that type of a history, we have to do training with your eyes closed to get the brain back into balance, because with eyes closed, that should be a safe place for us. If we close our eyes and all hell breaks loose in our map, because our brain is producing too much of stuff, that's not something that's going to allow you to heal and really use sleep to rejuvenate. Down here, this bottom row, this is looking at the crosstalk in the brain. The right side has to talk to the left side to the right side, front, back, front, diagonal. It's like a web that goes on in there. When we see green, that means that there's this amazing, nice conversation going. If we see blue, which I've got a little bit of blue, that means that there's not enough communication. If we see red, that means that there's a lot of overstimulation, too much crosstalk, like two adults yelling in the room. Nothing much gets done, so that's not efficient. So that side to side, back, front, all over the place communication is really, really important for efficiency and for us to feel good. Now, when you turn the page, this is still with your eyes closed. And this is looking at symmetry. The right side of your brain should work just as hard as your left. The left side should work just as hard as the right. They both need to pull their own weight. This has nothing to do with hand dominance. If you're a more creative versus logical person, the function of the brain is still the same. Each side should work equally. There will be times, and you can see that here, that we'll see an asymmetrical pattern, meaning one side might be predominantly red, the other side predominantly blue. What that means is the red side of the brain is working way too hard. The left side's like, chill, kicking back, really not pulling its weight. What that indicates is that there might be some chiropractic that needs to be included in the treatment protocol, because chiropractic can take that high side of the brain and the lower side and level it out. So I might share with you that we need to do more neurological type of testing here in the office so we can determine exactly what we need to do to help your brain get back on track so it heals faster. Now when you turn the next page, so we're on page 6, this is with eyes open. Now remember, with our eyes open, a lot more work has to happen. The brain is having to process a lot more information. So in my case, when I open up my eyes, I've got a lot more red, and I even have some yellow. Now yellow is even more out of balance than red. So as soon as I open up my eyes, bam, my wheels are turning, all the squirrels are talking in my head, I've got a lot going on up there. So when I do my training and we start to get things back into balance, this will start to become more green. Same thing with eyes closed. Same thing with the crosstalk, the connection down here, and then it also shows us the asymmetry pattern if there is one. Now on the next page, which is page 8, and we're almost done, so hang in there. This is the awesome page because it gives us the directions. If you see here, it'll say sites. This is telling me specifically, anatomically, what areas need to be retrained. Is it the frontal lobes? Is it the sensory motor strip? Is it the parietal? Where is it? And do we need to train with eyes open or eyes closed? The entrainment color tells us what color is going to either wake up or slow down the brain, and that depends on what you need. So if you're making a lot of red in your map, then we may want to use specific colors to kind of slow that down. If you're a lot of blue in your map, we may want to use yellow to brighten things up. So the glasses are going to have lights attached to them, and they will be flashing at the speed we want your brain to work at when we're retraining you. So this is depicted based on what your map shows and also what your clinical picture is. So for those of you who you feel anxious, you need to make sure that you've told me that, because we never want to use yellow when we're training, because that can trigger some anxiety. For those of you who have a lot of blue in the alpha range, we do want to use yellow, but we need to make sure the lights are turned down really low, because if they're too bright, it's going to fatigue you more. So communication is the key. We can make a lot of assumptions based on what we see, but you need to verbally tell us, like, those lights are too bright, or I can't see them at all, and we'll be able to kind of customize your session. Now on this side here, this lists the number of protocols that are needed, and what we mean by that are the location and how many general procedures do we need to do based on your map. Now that can range anywhere from 2 protocols to 4. 2 to 4, so you'll be somewhere in between there. And what that tells us is we need to do approximately 10 retraining sessions per protocol. Sounds like a lot, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I've got 4 protocols, that means 40 sessions. It sounds like a lot, but if you were going to go to the gym because you decided you want rock hard biceps, you wouldn't just go once. You would go through a series of exercise routines at the gym multiple times. So the brain is like any other muscle. The more frequently we train, the better and faster results that we get. So really 40 is about the average of most people, and typically, not always, but typically at the end of 40, we're going to want to remap because we're going to want to see the change. If you have red in delta, I can guarantee you I'm going to want to remap you because that's a sign of inflammation. So I can usually give you a heads up before we start the training if you're going to be a candidate to remap. And then as you go through the training, you'll feel better and we'll just make that decision. But for some of you, because of the metabolic issues, we're going to need to remap you. Now, the training sessions last approximately 30 minutes. That side of the business runs pretty much on time. My side, we're a little more fluid and flexible. So depending upon what the issue is, I always try to run on time. But the NIT training, that's pretty like you got to catch the train at 2, you better be here at 2. As you're training, we are watching to make sure your brain does not get tired, especially for those low alpha people. You're going to fatigue quicker, especially if those lights are too bright. So we monitor every session and we're taking notes because we want to know the progress. We can see if your brain is training, we can see if your brain is tired, we can see if we need to do a half session, or you may be a candidate for doing multiple sessions in a day. But I'm going to go over more of those specifics in your video 3. Back to the map. On the next page, this is on page 9, this is a computer-generated list of supplements that you may benefit for. You really don't need to pay attention to this because I'm customizing those supplements for you. And I'm going to go into a little more detail in the next video about how I come up with what you need for brain health. And then the following pages are more data analysis things that you really don't need to pay attention to, but it spits it out, so we give it to you. So you have just completed Brain Interpretation 101. Congratulations for hanging in there. And I will see you on the 3rd video to talk to you about what to expect for your training. Bye-bye.